So we're going to spend the remainder of our time talking about cranberry, kidney, and yellow beans. So as a whole, we had 62 entries looking at crayons, kidneys, and yellows. Of those, they were just about split down the middle, with 30 being commercial and 32 being experimental. Looking at our average yields, they're pretty similar across each of these classes, between 26 and 27 bags per acre at our irrigated location. And then looking at our dry land location, we still pulled some pretty good yields out of these this year with some timely rains in that 22 to 24 bags per acre out of these bush type beans. To talk first about cranberries, we'll just look at irrigated yield data today, as that's the majority of this production. There's not much new going on in the cranberries market class. We have over here Etna. It's been our commercial standard for a good number of years. And still remains, in the upper end of that. We do have a few experimentals that are, definitely challenging. So that's always good to see that we're still finding some new varieties in that market class, as well as some other newer ones such as Armoretto and Vero are some newer ones that we've looked at that are very much in the conversation when we get to some of these extended 3-year analysis. And when we do look at that, just looking at commercial lines as far as our 3-year irrigated ratings to get an idea of what these look like. We have our commercial standard here on the right of Etna Crayon, and then our number 2 commercial line is actually Chianti in that 3-year irrigated rank. We do have some experimentals that have pushed the envelope on yield a little bit, but these would be the 2 relevant experimental cranberry beans that we do have. Moving into dark red kidneys, we have had some exciting new releases in the dark red market. When we look at our upper 90th percentile here, we're once again about half experimental with some of these newer lines really pushing the envelope. A new MSU one, K16136, along with their other newer release, Red Cedar, are very much up there. And Red Rover and Dynasty would be a good one to keep an eye on here too, as that actually has performed really well in our 3-year type average. It is a little bit later maturity than some of our other market classes, which could have penalized it a little bit this year, as we did have a relatively early type frost that I believe penalized some of these really late maturities over in Montcalm County. In our 3-year, we have, as far as commercial rankings, Dynasty would be our number 1 rank at 107-day maturity, and you can see how green that is holding on. These border here's are Etna crayons that are starting to come down, where that Dynasty still has a little ways to go there as far as the dark red. And then our number 2 would be Red Rover, which is on the earlier end of that, about an 85-day type bean. Talking on light red kidneys, we do have some exciting news in light reds too. Red Dawn has been one of our newer releases here and really has some increased yield potential in the light red kidney market class. It's pushing those averages this year over 35 bags per acre in comparison to our standard of Cal Early, which is still in there at about 33. Cal Early has been around for a long time, so it's always good to see that we're continuing to make advancements and having new lines in the conversation in these large seeded beans. But we also have Pink Panther and Coho from MSU, all statistically within that upper end group of this class. And as we move out to 3-year irrigated type ranks, our number 1 is that Red Dawn that we just discussed, relatively early maturity, has some pretty good structure, a little bit of some disease issues going on in this year, but not too uncommon based on the trial. And then Clouseau would be our number 2 on the left here, a little bit longer. Then to talk on white kidney beans, a little bit of a smaller trial here with 3 experimentals and 3 commercials and 2 experimentals. We have a new experimental at MSU, K16924. This has been a really impressive yielder from MSU. Pushing that envelope over 35 bags again this year with our relatively commercial type standards, Yeti, Beluga, in that 17 to coming up on 30 with ND Whitetail. So that's really some impressive yield potential out of that white kidney bean. And then just to look at a 1-year irrigated rank of these commercials. So this year our top ranked commercial line was that Whitetail from North Dakota State University. This is the first year we brought it over to test it into our trials. Overall, it's looked pretty good. And then number 2 would be Beluga at that longer maturity of about 106 days. So then, similar to what we have done in the other trials, we did look at some different agronomic type trials on these large seeded beans. For all this testing, we utilized Etna cranberry beans. We had 4 treatments here with 4 replications in Montcalm County. And these looked at some different rates of nitrogen as well as some timings, as we are still side dressing some of these beans when we cultivate. So our first would be our untreated with 0 pounds of nitrogen applied at planting or at side dress. Number 2 would be no nitrogen applied at planting and coming back with about 20 pounds to side dress in. 3 was 45 pounds up front and then top dressing with 20 pounds later. And then 4 would be that same 45 pounds up front, but bringing 60 pounds in later. So this brought us to their totals of 0, 20, 65, and 105 pounds of total actual and applied per acre. For a quick visual of what these did look like, there's a pretty clear biomass type response that we do see from this. Our 0 pounds total on the left, and our 20 pounds total on the right. And as we move up to our next one at 65 pounds, we see that we continue moving up in that plant growth. And by the time we got up to 105 pounds, we had a pretty lush, dense canopy there. And you can see the influence this had on plant disease. We had some common blight that came into this trial. And you can see even the difference just between our 65 pounds and our 105 pounds. That disease severity does come up a little bit as we build that canopy and trap more moisture in there and not allow it to dry out. We still did see that positive response to nitrogen applications on these Etna crayons from 0 up to 20 pounds. Those 2 did group together between 20 and 2,500 pounds per acre. And our 65 pounds and 105 pounds did group together at that 32 to 35 bags per acre for those Etna crayons under irrigation. And then the last one we'll talk about is looking at some micronutrient applications on these Etna crayons as well. The same type of trial we discussed earlier with our first treatment of being untreated with no micronutrients applied. Our second treatment was 32 ounces of zinc and 32 ounces of manganese applied in that 2x2 with our starter nitrogen. Number 3 was the same 32 ounces applied with our post-weed control application. And then number 4 was the same 32 ounces applied R1. So then this yield data does look a little bit different. Statistically, our untreated and our 2x2 and our post did group together there. We look at numerical trends, we lean towards a benefit to that 2x2 application as it does trend up a little bit. And then not much from our post timing. The one difference we did have there is a little bit of a drag off on that R1, which could have been a response to that high rate of foliar product applied at the reproductive stage of those beans. And these are, bush type determinate beans and they flower one time. And if we did knock a few blossoms off on that, they may not have recovered from that application, looking at those 32 ounces rates of both products. So are there any questions on our cranberry, kidney, or yellow bean type research from 2020?
Hey, Scott, this is Dan. That white kidney that you had there that's been yielding pretty good out of Michigan State, is that a kidney shape or is that the shape of the beluga?
So that new one, the 16 number, does have a bit of a kidney shape to it and not so much of that bullet shape.
Like an alluvia bean does, like the beluga.
Right.
Okay.
Scott, this is Keith again. Not just to these classes, but going back to your nitrogen studies, do you see a benefit of adding sulfur to the nitrogen and including that in the study potentially going forward?
Yeah, good question, Keith. So in regards to that sulfur application in with the N, that was something we looked at a little harder last year because we thought we might be able to improve that nitrogen use efficiency by adding sulfur. And what we had found is that beans aren't particularly responsive to sulfur. Generally, if we're keeping sulfur into our rotation, beans will not respond to additional sulfur. not to say that we don't want to, keep sulfur in that rotation. And if dry beans is where we have an opportunity to get it into our soil, that works out perfectly fine. But they are not particularly responsive like we have seen in corn and some other grass crops like wheat.
Thank you.